Hello, welcome back to my channel. If you're new, which you probably are, thank you for choosing my channel over the thousands of channels that you could be watching right now. Thanks for coming back. Now, this video that I have here, it's a bit different from what I've done before. It's a little similar to my first one, if you've seen that. It's a video that I've been wanting to make for a while now. The subject and themes that are included in the Backrooms are probably one of my favorite types of, I guess you would call it horror. Horror being one of my favorite genres of pretty much anything that you could think of. And with this video, I just wanted to give my own take on why we find backrooms and in general liminal spaces themselves to be creepy, or how some people take them as downright scary. So enough chit chat, let's get into it. So, what and where does liminal come from? What is the definition of liminal space, you might ask? Well, it's a transitory area or state of mind. These spaces can be real or imaginative. The term liminal was first used around 1909, but was referred to as liminality. Used by Arnold van Gennep, a French anthropologist. I probably said his name wrong. They described the transitional state of the unknown as liminality. Arnold and another anthropologist, Victor Turner, studied lots of rites of passages from around the world. So think of coming of age rites, sort of like a Sweet 16 in our modern times, stuff like that. They found that the in-between state of the passages, that being they had started but haven't finished, to be the most stressing part for the participants. So liminal as a concept has existed longer than most people think it has. To put in a more digestible definition, it's simply a transitional space in either physical space or a mental experience. Examples like hallways, waiting rooms, bus stops, or things like waiting for test results, an interview, a divorce, moving to a new area. I hope some of you are starting to see a theme amongst all the things I've listed here. While liminality itself is not a state of mind or emotion, think of it as a vessel that carries the actual emotion that's responsible for the sensations we feel. Yes, that emotion is fear, or more specifically, the fear of the unknown. So now you might ask, what is fear of the unknown? Well, to put simply, it's fear of the uncertainty, the choice you made or results you're waiting for. We've all experienced this at one point, and some may be dealing with it every day. Anxiety and panic commonly go hand in hand with the unknown, and is the reason why many tend to live easy, boring, and safe lives to avoid such stresses in life. The fear of not knowing what will happen stops them from ever following through, or stops them from starting something. And in the case of horror, the unknown is often the most powerful tool one can use to elicit a strong response from the viewer, reader, or player. With fear of the unknown, you can use the imagination of your audience to do most of the work for you. That may sound lazy, but really it will work only if the creator puts actual work into the setting and story. So for many, going into a dark building will be enough to terrify them. And that would be understandable since we can't see in the dark, thus making us unaware of anything around us. Many people having an actual fear of the dark itself as well, which is a reasonable fear to have given that we as humans have an automatic built-in fear of the dark. But there are also others who wouldn't fear going into the dark building, and of course that's reasonable as well. But what happens when this brave soul goes into the building alone and hears something? Footsteps in the distance, or maybe something that sounds like whispers, but I know no one else is in the building. I came in alone. Then it just turns out that it was a rat or a dog that was making the noise you heard, easing your mind back to your wounded bravery. A lot of movies do this. A character will be alone somewhere, thinking they're alone, but they hear something and we, the audience, will also begin to imagine what it could be. The build-up to the reveal is usually the most scary or stressful, since the imagination is one of the most powerful tools in horror. A good example of this type of horror being put to use is the genre of Lovecraftian horror. Lovecraftian horror, or cosmic horror, is a type of horror based on the works of H.P. Lovecraft, who made fear of the unknown his main driving force. His most popular stories deal with characters struggling and coming to the realization that there are things that we cannot and simply will not ever understand. He has inspired many different kinds of work for almost a century now, and one of the more well-known pieces of media in recent history would have to be Bloodborne, but we're not talking about that right now. What is fear of being alone? This one is a bit more simple to define. Fear of being alone stems from our own human history. In short, early humans were at a disadvantage when they were alone, since a lot of what we accomplished was because we had help from the tribe. Humans are technically considered predators in the animal world, but that in no way means that a single human could 1v1 a saber-toothed barehanded or any other type of prey animal, especially back in our prehistoric days. So, early humans greatly depended on the help of the tribe to have a thriving community. You can see how one would develop a fear of being alone in that type of situation. So, as for modern times, it's become a bit different, but more or less the same in some areas. We live in an extremely connected world, but many or more through the recent years have become lonelier. A lot of this is a form of self-isolation because many would confuse digital interaction with real human interaction, which is something I won't get into now since that is another topic to get into. But taking that away from the modern person who is isolated, doesn't interact with many people, or the person who isn't isolated and does interact with many people, creates an uncanny feeling. Since we live in a massively populated world where we expect to see people almost everywhere we go, it would be extremely off-putting to go to a grocery store where you would definitely always see someone. But then you notice that there is no trace of people or any evidence that someone has ever been there. Maybe that wouldn't be the scariest thing you ever saw, but it would give a certain odd feeling. So take that feeling and combine it with being somewhere you know absolutely nothing about, and you can see how these fears build up to something more, which it's something you've probably experienced in your lifetime, being in an unfamiliar place, a new country, a new state, maybe a new house. And it's just this odd feeling that you're not supposed to be there and this place definitely isn't welcoming to you. Of course, in a less extreme way than the Backrooms itself. So what and why do we find liminal spaces scary? So to put it simply, a liminal space is a transitory space which is not the beginning or end. It's just an in-between state or place. Why do we fear liminal spaces as we know them today? Well, that is both an easy and complicated answer to give. I've already given you the easy but lengthy answer. The hard one is a little more than that and could be a video all on its own. But to dip our toes into that, we fear what we don't know, so being in a hallway, a long stretch of road, or an empty area that is usually filled with people is unsettling. This type of media, as it's become its own thing, very recently peers into two specific fears. One which I've already talked about and another I'll touch on. Fear of being alone, loneliness, and isolation is something that most people fear or are unsettled by. Humans are social creatures as evidenced by our society and history. So by taking away that very thing, you've already unsettled most of your audience. And that is also why you can take something that isn't usually scary like a children's playground and make it so. Take away any human activity and you've got yourself some horror. Almost. Empty and quiet city streets, a deserted school, and an ominously unending office space devoid of any human activity. These all provoke isolation, feeling that you're truly alone in the world when you know that isn't true. All you need to do is leave that area and get back into the real world, right? But what if you can't and are really stuck there? Being alone isn't all that bad, right? Then that's when you hear something somewhere off in the distance. Maybe it was your mind. You're not certain, but also don't want to find out. There's no way of reaching the spot in the ground you fell through, which is now up on the ceiling. You truly are alone now in an unknown building of unending familiar looking places, or at least you think you are until you see or hear something. So this is something that I just wanted to touch upon, the connection to the 90s and 80s and maybe the 70s somewhat. What I'm going to talk about here isn't as an important topic, but is also the sole reason I've decided to make this video. Again, this is more of my own take and isn't set in stone. Looking at a lot of liminal space pictures and games, you can begin to see the ties it has with other locations with our own. A lot of entries to the genre use areas with architecture that were common or were synonymous with the 80s and 90s. And I know I'm not the only one who sees it, as it's not that hard to see. Some may wonder why this is the case, but it's actually an easy answer. Many of these things are just old and aren't frequented anymore. These old shopping malls or storefronts from 25 to 40 plus years ago are just abandoned now. They used to be the place to be at, but time has moved on. The internet, however, has frozen them in time. And I suspect the specific time period is used a lot because a lot of these creators have either grown up with them or remember seeing them. Which is why we tend to see almost every entry be anywhere between the 70s and early 2000s. This definitely also plays into the rise of the internet and the generations that were born with and grew up with the internet itself. And as our society changed, so did what we feared as well. Many of our new fears stopped being these tangible and somewhat easy to grasp concepts like monsters and aliens. They instead became complex dives into the mind and what it was that made us human. And one of these new fears, which actually isn't rooted in horror, quickly became one: the simulation theory. The idea that our reality is a computer simulation, sort of like a video game. And if you're unfamiliar with the simulation theory, I'll go over it briefly. It simply states that our reality is possibly a computer program being run by a higher level of life. Just like how we now at this current time can run complex video games that simulate a pretty realistic view of our own life. A good example being a game that probably everybody has played at one point in their life, Grand Theft Auto 5. Or if movies are more your thing, The Matrix is also a great example of the theory. Getting back to the discussion, I'm not saying that younger generations won't be interested in this type of horror, as that is simply not true, as we've seen the growing popularity of the liminal genre. But in my own opinion, and as someone who grew up with the 90s aesthetic, I find it a surreal experience to have been in some of these places where they were full of life at one point. Now they're settings for horror games and videos, which I want to state I'm not complaining at all, and I like that something familiar and normal can be turned into something that can also scare you. And finally, we get to the actual content of this video, the Backrooms. Now, getting into the meat of this video, what I've been waiting to talk about, I won't be going in-depth into the Backrooms lore as this isn't what this video is about. I'm just going to be touching on what I've been talking about for the first half of the video and how it applies here. So, for those who don't know, Backrooms came about in May 2019 on a 4chan post. From there, it was pretty much history as something new was born going forward. Searching for the first Backrooms video is sort of hard to pinpoint, and I can't really find which the true one was, so if you can, let me know. There are a couple of videos that were posted in 2019, but those were just mostly meme compilations, which obviously isn't what we're talking about today. I think the first major milestone was the game Day 1 by Puppet Combo, but again, I won't be talking about the games yet, at least. So from what I could find, the first actual video installment of the Backrooms was by a channel called Heaven Royalty. If you don't know who that is, they're responsible for the excellent SCP videos Dollhouse and Overlord, which I highly recommend watching. The video itself is well made, considering that they used a modded GTA 5, which can come with some limitations. But as you can see, it works, and they used every ounce of creativity to make this a fantastic entry. This video is one of my personal favorites because of the presentation. We take the first-person view of a police officer who's on a wellness check for a couple who's been missing for a few days. The officer arrives at the house and begins to search with another fellow officer. As the two search the house, you can tell that something is off, but not quite in the way we think.
Police department, anyone inside say something?
Police department, if you're inside, say something.
Police department, anyone inside say something?
They do their usual police thing and search the house, call out to whoever might be there. And finally, we have the no clip, straight to the point. When the officer recovers, he initially believes that he's fallen in a basement or something like that, which realistically might happen if you were to end up in the Backrooms. You might think that there was an open cellar door or something. The first few minutes of the Backrooms are uneventful, not boring in any sense, but it builds that feeling of something being wrong. We see the officer wander around, trying to find some way that leads out, unbeknownst to him that there isn't a reliable way out in the first place. Here, we see him coming to the realization that something is definitely wrong now. All the while, someone or something can be heard off in the distance somewhere. Not close, but not far either. Is he actually alone, or is there someone else here? The tension begins to build as he walks through more bizarre structures. He comes into contact with some PS1 looking NPCs. At one point, he walks through a supersized version of the Backrooms.
Are you fucking kidding me?
And I love this part, as not only does it give the video a grander spectacle, but to me it also plays into the whole we're not alone, as there might be even bigger entities or humans that get lost in there, seemingly making our universe much bigger or smaller, however you see it. This all culminates into him running into a seemingly random and out-of-place computer. Oh, and I forgot to mention, throughout parts of the video, he hears this robotic, distorted voice speaking to him.
You've been here before.
Who is this?
You've seen this all before.
Who the fuck is this?
You have to keep going.
What's going on?
Nobody will find you in here. You have to keep going.
He thinks that it's dispatch talking to him, but soon finds out that it's not. We don't know who this is or if it's even a person speaking to him. The computer can be seen with an instance of Unreal Engine open. At first glance, those who don't know won't think much of it, but those who have messed around with Unreal Engine before or have some experience with game design know what's shown on the screen is a current or past build of the Backrooms. It also appears to be showing a past moment in time of someone sitting at the desk, possibly making where the officer is at now. The voice starts speaking to him and implies that the place he is in was created or changed by someone.
Somehow, mine found you. But it wasn't good enough for you. You had to change it, make it your own. Is this what you wanted? To disfigure my world? Is this what you wanted?
Can you just tell me how to get out of here? Please.
I hope you've learned your lesson. Goodbye.
Though we never get an answer to what was said, I appreciate how this version of the Backrooms is subtly implied to be a created world, or as we better know it, as a simulation. I don't think any other Backrooms video I've watched has gone down this path. They seem to take the Backrooms and turn it into an actual location that exists in our world, or have it be another dimension. But with this one, a hint of it being a simulation and that the officer found an actual bug in our real world makes the story leagues ahead of many of the recent entries in my opinion. Towards the end of the video, an entity appears, and it also seems to be the noise that we kept hearing earlier.
Hey, stay back! Stay the fuck back!
Rich, where the hell have you been?
By some stroke of luck, the officer accidentally falls back into our reality, and it ends there. I think this is something else that is done well, and I wouldn't say it's better than the trope of being stuck in the Backrooms, but I like this ending here because we know no one is going to believe what he says. But the issue that some or all of you have noticed by this point is that the officer was wearing a body cam. This element of the video is fantastic, and I'm glad there wasn't a follow-up because it really lets your mind make up possibilities of what could have happened with this found footage. Maybe they actually believed it was real, or probably they just thought it was nonsense and just brushed it off. But that's the fun part because you can make up any ending you want to this video. It uses the elements that I talked about earlier, being alone, afraid of what and where he is, the 90s-esque looking level and NPC models, the building anxiety and realization that he may be stuck there forever. All of this is enhanced, of course, by the great voice acting and the unique camera perspective, that being a body cam which allows us to see the officer's body language, albeit a little limited since it's not live action, and it's tied to the GTA 5 engine. So now we get to the newer versions of the Backrooms. Now of course there are more videos that have come out recently which have further increased the popularity of the Backrooms. While I won't go over each video since that would make this too long, I'll briefly go over the important bits and channels that I find to be the good ones among the sea of content. So no surprise here, I think that Kane Pixels is the one to go to if you want top Backrooms content. Not only is the production quality great, but the narrative is there and it gives even more as to what would normally be a one-off type of video. He nails the atmosphere and I would even say enhances it even further. He doesn't go crazy with the architecture, which I think would be a point of criticism, but we do get sneak peeks of it here and there. Another thing that I enjoy about his series is that he isn't going off the official lore. The lore that people created for the Backrooms is, I don't want to say cringe, but I'm going to say cringe. And for that, I'm glad that he's created his own narrative with the most minimal elements that are left for interpretation. While his Backrooms may not be the official version of the Backrooms, I think it probably should be the way to go. The second on my list would be Async Research. Now, if you've seen Kane Pixels videos, you'll probably recognize the name as it's from his videos. But as I understand now, and if you didn't, this channel is not connected to Kane's at all. They've taken the liberty of using the same name as the fictional company from Kane's, but not so much the quality. Though that isn't me saying it's not good. The quality is there and it almost hits the same as Kane's, but you can tell from points in the video as well as the voice acting that it is not Kane's work. But regardless, if you've watched all of Kane's work, then this is something that you will definitely enjoy if you're craving more. Again, the architecture is a bit basic, but it works with what it has and even introduces some new locations which really work with the theme of isolation and the unknown. So definitely give this one a watch. Aster Industries is next, and I'm a little mixed on this one. This one doesn't directly take anything from Kane's, but the inspiration is there as well as those hazmat models that they all seem to use. This one probably is the one that tried to replicate the realism, but just didn't quite make it there. At times you can tell that it's a 3D animation, which there isn't anything wrong with at all, but I think at this point you should start adding your own spin to it and style as well. That being said, it's good, but short. And I'm not certain where or what they're trying to do with the narrative. These last two are sticking pretty close to what Kane did in terms of narrative, so it's kind of boring to see the same thing replicated instead of them doing their own spin on it. But again, if you crave more of the Kane Pixel style, then look no further than Aster Industries. Next is Matt Studios, and to me, this is the second best when it comes to visuals compared to Kane's. Not only that, but this one takes the narrative a bit lightly, so it's more of a basic exploration video. Not that there's anything wrong with that. Along with Kane's and Async's videos that feature a civilian being lost in the Backrooms, Matt Studios' video, First Encounter, is what I would say is top tier. It has it all from what I've described more or less, and the architecture is more featured in this video. So if you like your videos to be more atmosphere heavy, then I think this channel would work for you. Finally, last but not least, we have Lost in the Hyperverse. This one is a departure of what we've seen so far with the Backrooms. It still uses the setting of the Backrooms, but also uses other locations that we haven't seen so far. All this while providing a 3D stylized look that doesn't try to replicate the realism of the previous entries. This series is definitely more focused on the spectacle above all else, which isn't a bad thing. I've found this one to feel more like a dream state, like this is more of a place you'd see in your dreams, not something that you would no-clip into, but that's my take on it. It's a real experience, if you will, that's akin to dreams being interpreted as actual planes of existence that you can travel to, much like the works of Lovecraft. There is a narrative in this one, but it really is toned down and not really the focus of the series. But all in all, I like this one for being its own interpretation of the Backrooms, even if it isn't my favorite. I think we may have reached the peak of what the Backrooms can offer in terms of content. Not that I'm saying that nothing more can be done, but popularity-wise. While I am sad to admit that, I'm glad that it happened and that it showed that slow-burning, psychological, existential, and at times cosmic horror can be enjoyed just as much as the cheap and sometimes cringy horror we get sometimes. I also hope this trend of using the 90s and early 2000s types of settings, themes, and architecture continues, within these types of videos because it's something that is unique for our current time, as it had not existed before, obviously. Horror itself has been stagnant for a long time now, and movies, games, especially games, since I enjoy a lot of horror games. Horror movies, well, I'm not saying that there isn't any good ones out there, but I think we can all mostly agree that a lot of bad ones take the limelight most of the time. So it kind of sucks to love horror as a genre, with movies especially. But with something like the Backrooms that's come out recently, it's really, how do I say, reinvigorated my love for horror in a way that I can't really describe. Well, I mean, I basically did in this video if you're still listening to me ramble on, but it's something that just hasn't been, I don't want to say hasn't been done, but it's a very specific kind of horror that doesn't really show up a lot, and it has to be done in a specific way, otherwise it'll just be another trend that doesn't last that long. And I'm glad for the most part that this has lasted as long as it has. Almost, well, not almost, it's been about 2 years now. So yeah, I'm excited to see where this goes, if it still has some life in it. If you're still listening to this, thank you for getting to the end of the video. This is something that I've been wanting to make for a while now. It probably isn't perfect, and maybe I could have put something else in somewhere. I'm not sure exactly of what I could have done, but regardless, I like the way this video turned out, and I hope you did too. And once again, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.